The judge slammed his gavel and demanded I remove my Navy cross. My own brother looked away while his wife smiled like she had already won the lottery. I unpinned the medal and placed it on the table without a single word of protest. They thought I was surrendering to their demands. They had no idea my compliance was the very first step in dismantling his entire judicial career and her family empire. My name is Aaliyah. I am 33 years old. I served my country before building a private intelligence firm that could bring this entire corrupt courtroom to its knees. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to sit in silence and watch greedy people dig their own graves. The air inside the municipal courthouse was thick with the smell of lemon floor wax and old wood. I stood at the heavy mahogany defense table, perfectly still. My dress blue uniform was immaculate. The dark fabric rested sharply across my shoulders, and the creases in my trousers were pressed to military perfection. I had come straight to the courthouse from a Veterans Day keynote address at the Civic Center across town. I did not have time to change into civilian clothes, and frankly, I did not care to. I earned the right to wear this uniform. Across the center aisle sat my older brother Jamal and his wife Chloe. They were the plaintiffs in this absurd civil dispute. They were suing me to force the sale of our late grandfather's sprawling 50-acre estate. My grandfather had deeded the property exclusively to me before he passed away. He knew I would respect the land and preserve his legacy. He also knew Jamal was hopelessly irresponsible with money and completely under the control of a woman who viewed our family merely as stepping stones for her own ambition. Chloe sat there in a pristine white designer suit looking like she owned the building. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a severe twist, and her posture radiated pure entitlement. She leaned over and whispered something into Jamal's ear. Jamal just nodded, staring down at his expensive leather shoes. My brother was 35 years old, but he looked like a scolded child. Our parents, Calvin and Valerie, had always treated Jamal like the golden child of the Washington family. They excused his endless string of failed business ventures and bankruptcies. They praised his potential while entirely ignoring my actual accomplishments. Chloe married him for the perceived status of our family name and the false promise of generational wealth. When she realized Jamal was broke, she turned her sights on my inheritance. Judge Harrison Sterling peered down at me from his elevated bench. He was a man in his late 50s with a ruddy complexion and a permanent scowl etched into his features. His bias had been palpable from the moment I walked through the double doors. He dismissed my attorney's opening statements and constantly interrupted my defense. Now he was staring directly at my chest. "Miss Washington, this is a civil dispute over a property line and an estate transfer," Judge Sterling said, his voice dripping with condescension. "This is not a costume party. Remove that medal. It is a disrespectful prop intended to manipulate the court and garner unearned sympathy from the bench." The entire courtroom went dead silent. The court reporter actually paused her typing. My attorney shifted uncomfortably beside me, preparing to object to the blatant disrespect. I held up my hand to stop him. I looked directly into Judge Sterling's pale blue eyes. I felt the cool weight of the Navy Cross resting against my uniform jacket. This was the second highest military decoration awarded for extraordinary heroism in combat. I earned it as a Fleet Marine Force corpsman, saving 3 wounded Marines under heavy enemy fire in a valley so hot and blood-soaked I still saw it when I closed my eyes at night. To call it a prop was an insult of the highest magnitude. I could have caused a scene. I could have cited federal regulations regarding the wear of military decorations. I could have demanded the judge recuse himself for clear prejudice. But I am a strategist by trade. My company provides high-level cybersecurity and private intelligence to federal agencies. I run a firm that operates in the shadows, gathering data and exposing threats. You do not win a war by screaming at the first obstacle. You win by letting your enemy underestimate you. I reached up to my chest. My fingers closed around the bronze cross and the navy blue ribbon. I unfastened the pin with slow, deliberate movements. I lowered my hand and placed the medal onto the solid oak table. The heavy metal made a sharp clinking sound that echoed through the quiet room. I kept my face completely devoid of emotion. Across the aisle, Chloe raised her hand to cover a vicious, triumphant smirk. She leaned close to Jamal again. Her voice carried across the quiet space, intentionally loud enough for me to hear every word. "I told you she was faking it," Chloe whispered sharply. "She was just a glorified paper pusher over there. She probably bought that medal on the internet to look intimidating. It is pathetic, really." Jamal nodded in agreement, completely abandoning any loyalty to his own blood. He had spent his entire life being coddled by our parents, who always insisted I should accommodate his fragile ego. Valerie and Calvin Washington raised a man who could not even defend his sister's honor in a public setting because he was too terrified of upsetting his manipulative wife. Let them talk, I thought to myself. Let them build their false narrative. Judge Sterling nodded in satisfaction, clearly pleased that he had asserted his dominance over a black woman standing proudly in his courtroom. "Now that we have dispensed with the theatrics," Judge Sterling announced loudly, "we will proceed. I am granting a temporary stay on the property restrictions. Miss Washington, you will sign the acknowledgement forms today. This court is strongly advising you to reconsider your position on the estate sale before the final hearing on Friday." He was legally backing me into a corner, attempting to force my hand before the week ended. I knew a temporary stay meant Chloe and Jamal could bring surveyors and contractors onto my grandfather's land to begin their preliminary work. I looked at my attorney, who was visibly angry. I gave him a subtle nod indicating that I would comply for now. I walked forward toward the clerk's desk to sign the temporary stay order. I let my shoulders drop just a fraction of an inch. I lowered my chin, pretending to be a defeated woman realizing she had lost the battle. Chloe watched me approach the center divider, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of victory. She had placed her expensive leather portfolio on the edge of the opposing counsel's table. The folder was overflowing with property maps and legal briefs. As I reached out to take the pen from the court clerk, I glanced down at Chloe's disorganized pile of documents. Chloe carelessly bumped her elbow against the leather portfolio. A single piece of premium heavy stock paper slid out by exactly 1 inch. It was just enough for my trained eyes to catch the details. In my line of work, you survive by noticing the things other people overlook. You scan environments for anomalies. You process data in a fraction of a second. I read the elegant embossed text printed upside down at the top of the page. Sterling and Company Developments. The name hit my brain like a lightning strike. Sterling. I looked up at the judge sitting on his bench. Judge Harrison Sterling. I looked back down at the letterhead. Sterling and Company Developments. Chloe had claimed in her initial filings that she merely wanted to purchase the estate to build a modest community center to give back to the neighborhood. But community centers do not use high-end corporate development firms. They certainly do not use development firms that share a very distinct last name with the presiding judge of the civil court handling the property dispute. My mind began connecting the data points at light speed. Chloe came from a wealthy family of real estate developers known for aggressive acquisitions. Judge Sterling was fast-tracking a property dispute over 50 acres of prime real estate. The judge was actively suppressing my defense and demanding I yield the land. This was not a family squabble fueled by sibling rivalry. This was a highly coordinated illegal land grab facilitated by severe judicial corruption. I kept my breathing steady. I signed the temporary stay order with smooth, elegant strokes. I handed the pen back to the court clerk and offered a polite nod. I turned around and walked back to my defense table. I picked up my Navy Cross from the polished wood. I did not pin it back onto my uniform. Instead, I slid the cold bronze medal safely into my trouser pocket. I looked at Jamal one last time. He shifted his gaze to the floor, entirely unable to meet my eyes. I turned my back on the courtroom and pushed open the heavy double doors. The hallway outside was bright and cold, the marble floors reflecting the harsh fluorescent lighting. The air was much easier to breathe out here. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my encrypted mobile phone. My firm is not a standard security company. We are a Tier 1 federal contractor. We handle digital forensics, cyber warfare, and deep background intelligence for clients who cannot afford to leave a digital footprint. I dialed my lead cybersecurity analyst. The line connected immediately. I need a full digital forensic sweep starting right now, I said, my voice low and authoritative. Target 1 is Judge Harrison Sterling of the Municipal Civil Court. Target 2 is my sister-in-law Chloe Washington and her entire family's real estate portfolio. What are we looking for, boss? My analyst asked. Follow the money, I instructed, walking down the courthouse corridor with purposeful strides. Look for offshore accounts, shell companies, wire transfers, and deeply buried connections between Sterling and Company developments and our honorable judge. Pull their communications, track their locations, and crack their ledgers. They think they just bullied a helpless veteran into surrendering her family legacy. They just crossed the wrong woman. Understood, my analyst replied, the sound of rapid keyboard clicking already echoing through the receiver. We will have the preliminary data matrix ready within the hour. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket. My grandfather worked his entire life with his bare hands to purchase that land. He endured decades of systemic discrimination and financial hardship to ensure he had something of value to leave behind for his descendants. He trusted me to protect it because he knew Jamal lacked the spine to defend our history. Chloe wanted to pave over my grandfather's blood and sweat to line her own pockets. Judge Sterling thought he could use his gavel to strip away my dignity and facilitate a fraudulent corporate expansion. They believed I was just a woman in a costume playing a role I did not earn. They thought the Navy Cross was a prop. I stepped out of the courthouse and into the crisp autumn air. The trap was already set. They simply did not realize they were the ones standing inside it. Why must you always embarrass your brother, Aaliyah? Chloe just wants to build a nice community center on that land. Sign it over. Jamal needs this win. I turned slowly. My mother, Valerie, stood blocking my path to the courthouse exit. She wore her Sunday best on a Tuesday, a tailored emerald suit meant to project absolute respectability to anyone walking past us in the corridor. My father, Calvin, stood right beside her, his arms crossed over his chest, his jaw set in that familiar look of profound disappointment he reserved exclusively for me. Neither of them asked if I was okay. Neither of them asked why the judge had just ordered me to strip a Combat Valor medal from my chest in a public forum. They only cared about the narrative they had constructed for their friends at church and their country club peers. In their eyes, Jamal was the brilliant entrepreneur who was always just one lucky break away from a massive fortune, and I was the difficult, aggressive daughter who refused to play along and support the men of the family. A community center. I repeated, my voice dropping to a calm, flat register. I looked at my mother's perfectly pressed collar. Is that what they told you? You honestly believe Chloe's family, a corporate real estate syndicate known for bulldozing historic neighborhoods, wants 50 acres of prime city-adjacent property to plant a community garden and host bake sales? Do not use that tone with your mother, Calvin snapped, stepping forward to crowd my physical space. Your brother is trying to establish a real legacy for this family. He went to business school to build an empire. You went off to play in the mud with a rifle because you could not handle the pressure of real corporate expectations. Now you are back squatting on land your grandfather left to you by mistake. Theodore was practically blind and senile at the end, Aaliyah. You took advantage of an old man. The words felt like a physical strike. My grandfather Theodore was the sharpest man I ever knew until his dying breath. He bypassed Jamal in the will specifically because he watched Jamal run 3 different startups straight into Chapter 11 bankruptcy, constantly bailed out by Calvin and Valerie, draining their own retirement accounts to save his pride. Theodore left the estate to me because he knew I had the discipline to protect it. Before I could correct my father's blatant revisionist history, the heavy oak doors of the courtroom swung open. Jamal and Chloe stepped into the hallway. Chloe was practically glowing, her designer heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Jamal trailed half a step behind her, holding her briefcase like a hired assistant rather than an equal partner in their marriage. Valerie, Calvin. Thank you for waiting, Chloe said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. She linked her arm through Jamal's, pulling him forward to present a united front. I think the hearing went wonderfully. The judge clearly sees that Aaliyah is acting out of pure spite. I was just telling her to stop this foolishness, Valerie chimed in, rushing to agree with her white daughter-in-law. My mother had always bent over backwards to accommodate Chloe, terrified of losing access to the affluent social circles Chloe's family commanded. Aaliyah needs to stop holding this family hostage. I looked at my older brother. He was 35 years old, broad-shouldered, and physically imposing, yet he shrank completely under my gaze. You told them you are building a community center, Jamal, I asked. Jamal cleared his throat, adjusting his expensive but poorly fitted tie. It is a mixed-use development, Aaliyah. It will benefit the community. Chloe's father has the investors lined up. We just need the deed cleared. Why do you always have to make everything so difficult? You have your little IT consulting shop. Let me have this. Chloe dropped her sweet facade the exact moment the words left his mouth. The polite smile vanished, replaced by a cold, predatory stare. She stepped away from Jamal, closing the distance between us until she was mere inches from my face. Without the judge watching from the bench, she felt entirely invincible. Let us drop the act, Aaliyah, Chloe sneered, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper that only our tight circle could hear. You are a fake war hero playing businesswoman. You run a glorified tech support desk out of a rented commercial space in the financial district. My father owns the management group that holds your building's lease. You have until this Friday to sign that deed over to Jamal and me. I did not blink. Is that a threat, Chloe? It is a promise, she replied, her eyes narrowing with malicious intent. If you do not sign by Friday, my family will freeze your company's commercial lease. We will lock you out of your own office. We will cite a violation of the morality clause or claim you missed a hidden fee. You will have absolutely nothing. Your little tech support business will be operating out of a cardboard box by Monday morning. Valerie gasped, not in defense of me, but in pure panic over the conflict. Chloe, please, she will sign it. Do not ruin her completely. Aaliyah, just give them the paper. Sign the deed. Aaliyah, Calvin ordered, pointing a stern finger directly at my face. Do not let your stubborn pride destroy what little you have managed to build for yourself. Chloe's family has real power in this city. You cannot fight them. I stood completely still, absorbing their threats, their insults, and their profound ignorance. They thought I was running a basic IT help desk fixing broken routers. They had absolutely no idea that my firm was a Tier 1 federal contractor. They did not know that the servers sitting inside that commercial building held classified Department of Defense contracts, and that attempting to illegally lock me out of that facility would trigger an immediate federal response. They thought they were bullying a helpless scapegoat. I looked at Chloe's smug face, then at Jamal's cowardly posture, and finally at my parents who had sold me out for the illusion of status. I did not raise my voice. I did not lose my temper. I simply reached up, adjusted the lapels of my dress blue uniform, and offered Chloe a smile so cold it made her falter for a fraction of a second. Friday, I said smoothly. I look forward to it. Forward. I turned on my heel and walked away, my polished shoes echoing down the long corridor. I did not look back as Valerie shouted my name. I stepped out into the crisp autumn air, my phone vibrating in my pocket. It was my lead analyst confirming the forensic sweep on Judge Sterling had already bypassed the first firewall. The war had officially begun. I looked at Chloe's perfectly contoured face, contorted with a vicious arrogance she only displayed when the cameras were off and the judge was out of earshot. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice or scramble to defend the company I had built from the ground up. I simply reached up and adjusted the gold brass buttons on my dress blue uniform jacket, ensuring they aligned perfectly with the edge of my lapel. My absolute silence seemed to infuriate her more than any shouting match ever could. I offered her a smile so devoid of warmth that I saw her momentarily stiffen, stepping back just a fraction of an inch. Friday, I said smoothly. I look forward to it. I turned on my heel and walked down the marble corridor, the sharp and rhythmic clicking of my regulation shoes echoing off the high ceilings. Behind me, my mother shouted my name, her voice shrill with panic, demanding I come right back and apologize to my brother's wife. I did not turn around. I let the heavy glass doors of the courthouse swing shut behind me, cutting off their toxic chorus. They honestly believed I was running a glorified geek squad out of a cheap leased office space. They thought my servers were busy fixing broken email passwords and recovering lost spreadsheets for local dental clinics. Chloe's father might own the commercial real estate management group that held my building lease, but he had absolutely no idea who he had signed that contract with. My firm Aegis Cyber Defense was not a struggling local startup. We were a Tier 1 federal contractor with top-secret security clearances. The very servers Chloe was threatening to lock me away from currently held active Department of Defense contracts and classified federal intelligence databases. If her father's management company attempted to illegally change the locks on my suite, they would not be met by a local county sheriff handling a standard civil eviction. They would be greeted by armed federal agents responding to a direct breach of national security. I climbed into my black SUV and drove straight to the financial district. I badged through the 3-layer biometric security checkpoint at my office entrance, bypassing the heavily armed private security guards stationed in the lobby. My lead cybersecurity analyst, Tyrell, was already waiting for me in the glass-walled conference room at the center of our operations floor. The massive digital monitors covering the back wall were rapidly scrolling through lines of encrypted data, financial ledgers, and property deeds. "You were right to trust your gut," Tyrell said, handing me a secure digital tablet, the initial forensic sweep on Judge Harrison Sterling and the entire Sterling development portfolio just finished compiling. They have been running a highly sophisticated shell game for years, but arrogance makes people sloppy with their digital footprints. I swiped through the heavily encrypted documents Tyrell had managed to unearth. Chloe had stood in that courtroom and passionately claimed her family wanted my grandfather's 50 acres of land to build a nonprofit community center. She had fed my parents a tear-jerking story about uplifting the neighborhood, bringing in youth programs, and creating local jobs for marginalized teenagers. My parents swallowed every single lie because it came wrapped in white privilege and the promise of elite social status. But the architectural blueprints illuminated on my tablet told a completely different story. The schematics did not show basketball courts, community classrooms, or public gardens. They showed a massive multi-level luxury casino resort, complete with a high-roller hotel tower and a sprawling commercial entertainment complex. "Look at the zoning variance applications," Tyrell instructed, pointing to a highlighted column on the main monitor. Sterling and Company Developments submitted the rezoning requests for commercial gambling 6 months ago. But 50 acres of residential land cannot just magically transform into a high-density commercial casino zone without guaranteed municipal approval. And let me guess who sits on the Municipal Zoning Oversight Committee. I said, a grim realization settling over me as the pieces rapidly snapped together. "Judge Harrison Sterling," Tyrell confirmed. But it gets so much better. I traced the metadata from the development firm's offshore holding accounts in the Cayman Islands. Over the past 2 years, they have initiated 5 separate wire transfers totaling over $4 million. The receiving accounts are nested under 3 different corporate LLC names, but the ultimate beneficiary of every single account is a private trust owned entirely by our honorable judge. I stared at the irrefutable evidence of a massive federal crime unfolding right on the screen. Chloe and Jamal were not just trying to bully me out of my grandfather's land to fulfill some petty sibling rivalry. My property was the final critical puzzle piece in a multi-million-dollar political bribery ring. They needed those 50 acres to break ground on a casino empire, and they had bought a corrupt judge to forcefully pave the way. They thought they could use their wealth and local influence to crush a veteran into surrendering her family legacy. They thought I was just a powerless obstacle standing in the way of their monumental greed. They had absolutely no idea that my firm had recently been contracted by the Department of Justice to run a covert sweeping audit of this exact city's municipal zoning board. Chloe and Judge Sterling had just walked their entire criminal conspiracy directly onto my active federal radar. I locked the tablet and looked out through the glass walls at the live feed of my server room. They wanted to take everything from me by Friday. I was going to let them try. The digital trap was set, and I was going to make sure they burned their entire empire to the ground trying to spring it. The glow of the server monitors bathed the secure room in a harsh blue light, as Tyrell and I stared at the irrefutable evidence of a massive federal crime. Millions in offshore kickbacks carefully hidden through a labyrinth of shell companies, a luxury casino resort masquerading as a benevolent community center, a sitting civil court judge bought and paid for by my sister-in-law. I instructed Tyrell to package the encrypted data into a secure offline drive. We had the smoking gun, but we needed to let Chloe and her corrupt judge overplay their hand. I did not have to wait long. Friday morning arrived with the biting chill of late autumn. I pulled my black SUV into the private parking garage of my firm's commercial building in the financial district. I rode the executive elevator up to our floor, anticipating a standard morning security check. Instead, I stepped out to find my entire morning shift standing in the lobby. The heavy reinforced glass doors leading to our biometric security checkpoint were chained shut with thick industrial padlocks. Slapped right in the center of the glass was a bright orange legal notice. I walked past my murmuring staff and read the document. It was an emergency commercial eviction and immediate lockout order. The reasoning cited was a severe and hazardous zoning violation regarding unauthorized high-voltage equipment. My firm housed military-grade servers processing real-time threat assessments for the Department of Homeland Security. The equipment was certainly high voltage, but it was entirely authorized and strictly federally compliant. Chloe had used her father's management company to initiate the lockout, and the signature at the bottom of the injunction was a jagged, arrogant scrawl belonging to Judge Harrison Sterling. He had rubber-stamped the illegal eviction before the municipal courts even opened for the day. Chloe actually thought she had won. She believed she had just crippled my little IT business, rendering me bankrupt and desperate enough to sign over my grandfather's 50 acres. She had absolutely no idea she had just unlawfully locked out a Tier 1 federal contractor and actively disrupted classified operations. By signing that piece of paper, Judge Sterling had moved from civil corruption into federal sabotage. Tyrell stepped up beside me, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. He looked at the heavy padlocks and then at me. "Do we breach the doors?" he asked quietly, knowing we had the legal authority to bypass local civil lockouts for federal security reasons. I shook my head, keeping my eyes on the arrogant signature. No. Let them believe the locks are holding us back. Give them enough rope to hang themselves. Right on cue, my secure phone began to vibrate in my pocket. The caller ID flashed my brother's name, Jamal. He was timing this perfectly, ensuring he called right when I was standing in front of my chain doors, facing my employees. I accepted the call and lifted the phone to my ear without saying a single word. "Aaliyah, please tell me you are finally ready to be reasonable," Jamal said. His voice carried that familiar whining tone he always used when he wanted me to fix his catastrophic mistakes. He was trying to sound authoritative, but he just sounded like a coward reading from a script Chloe had drafted for him. "I am standing in front of my office, Jamal," I replied, keeping my voice dangerously level. "My doors are padlocked, an emergency injunction signed by the exact same judge overseeing our property dispute. Are you calling to gloat or are you calling to beg? I am calling to ask you to stop tearing this family apart." He sighed heavily, as if I was the one placing an enormous burden on his shoulders. "Chloe did not want to take it this far, Aaliyah. Her father just found some safety violations in your lease agreement. It is strictly business. But if you just sign the deed to the estate over to us today, she can make a few calls and get the injunction lifted by noon. You can go back to your little computer repairs, and our family can finally be at peace." I closed my eyes for a fraction of a second, channeling every ounce of military discipline I possessed to keep from screaming. He was utterly blind. He was 35 years old and willingly acting as an errand boy for a wealthy white family that viewed him as nothing more than a convenient prop. "There is no community center, Jamal," I stated flatly, giving him one microscopic chance to realize he was being played. "Do you even know what her family is actually planning to build on our grandfather's land?" He scoffed loudly into the receiver. "Stop being so paranoid. You are always so defensive and aggressive. Why do you always have to play the angry black woman making a scene everywhere you go? Mom and Dad are sick of it. Chloe's family is providing me with an executive vice president position in their development firm once this land deal goes through. I am finally getting a seat at the table. Do not ruin this for me just because you are jealous of my success. The audacity of his delusion was staggering. They were not giving him a seat at the table. They were using him to steal the only table our family owned. Our parents Calvin and Valerie had conditioned him to expect endless sacrifices from me to cushion his fragile ego. When we were younger, he blew his entire college tuition on a ridiculous luxury sneaker startup that went bankrupt in 6 months. My mother blamed my full-ride athletic scholarship for making him feel insecure. They demanded I take a grueling part-time job to help him pay off his angry creditors so he would not be embarrassed. I refused to be his scapegoat then, and I was refusing now. I am not taking the fall for your inadequacy anymore, Jamal, I said, my voice dropping to a glacial chill. Our grandfather knew exactly what he was doing when he left that land to me. He knew you would sell our family legacy for a fake job title and a pat on the head from a woman who despises you. If you do not sign that deed today, you will lose your business. Jamal threatened, his voice rising in high-pitched panic as he realized his gaslighting was failing. You are locked out, Aaliyah. You have no revenue. You have no office. You have absolutely nothing. Mom told you to just be quiet and sign the papers outside the courtroom, but you had to walk away and act superior. You think that military uniform makes you better than me. That uniform means I know how to spot an ambush, I replied smoothly. You are walking into a slaughter, and you are thanking the butcher for the invitation. I ended the call without giving him a chance to respond. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and turned to Tyrell. Chloe wanted to play a territorial game. She wanted to force me out of my commercial space to demonstrate her power. I was going to use her illegal eviction as the exact operational justification I needed to escalate our federal audit to the next tactical stage. Activate the disaster recovery protocol. I ordered my staff, my voice ringing out clearly in the crowded lobby. We are moving the mobile server units immediately. If Chloe wants to push us out of our commercial lease, we will set up our operations exactly where she wants us leased. Pack the transport vehicles. We are moving the entire firm to my grandfather's estate. The convoy of armored transport vehicles rolled onto my grandfather's 50-acre estate, just as the sun crested the horizon. My team at Aegis Cyber Defense operated with the ruthless precision of a military unit conducting a tactical relocation. Within 3 hours, the sprawling mahogany library of the main manor was transformed into a state-of-the-art mobile command center. Thick cables snaked across antique Persian rugs connecting military-grade servers to heavily encrypted satellite uplinks mounted on the slate roof. My grandfather built this house, with his own hands, a fortress of generational wealth that my parents never fully appreciated. Now it was literally serving as a digital fortress. Chloe thought her illegal commercial lockout would force me into submission. She expected me to spend my weekends sobbing in a cheap hotel room, begging my parents for financial forgiveness. Instead, she handed me the perfect operational justification to establish a secure perimeter on the exact land she was trying to steal. By executing an emergency disaster recovery protocol, I legally shielded our federal contracts from municipal interference. The trap was widening, and my family was completely oblivious to the jaws snapping shut around them. By Saturday morning, the perimeter was secured by my private detail. I was standing on the wraparound front porch, reviewing the latest decrypted wire transfers on my tablet when a silver luxury sports car tore up the gravel driveway. The vehicle swerved aggressively off the designated path and parked directly on the manicured front lawn, tearing deep, muddy gashes into the grass my grandfather used to maintain with intense pride. The driver's side door swung open and Jamal stepped out. My older brother looked enraged, wearing a tight designer polo shirt and expensive sunglasses that did absolutely nothing to hide his inherent cowardice. He slammed his car door and marched toward the porch. He did not even notice the high-definition surveillance cameras tracking his every movement or the 2 former Marine security contractors standing silently in the shadows of the wraparound porch. Jamal was too blinded by his own arrogance to process the reality of his surroundings. Aaliyah, what is all this garbage? Jamal shouted, gesturing wildly at the heavy transport trucks parked near the carriage house. Are you running a cult out here now? I told you to sign the deed yesterday. Chloe is furious. Her father had to call in favors to get you locked out of your little office space, and now you are out here playing camping games with your computer repair friends. I kept my eyes on my tablet, swiping through a forensic financial report detailing his wife's offshore accounts. I am conducting federal business on my private property, Jamal, I replied without looking up. You are currently trespassing on a secure facility. I strongly suggest you get back into your leased car and drive away before my security detail removes you from the premises. Jamal let out a loud, mocking laugh. He stomped up the wooden steps of the porch, closing the distance between us. Your security detail? You are so delusional, Aaliyah. You could not even make it through a desk job in the Navy without getting discharged, and now you are playing soldier on our grandfather's land. Stop embarrassing this family. Mom and Dad are sick of apologizing for you. Sign the paper right now so Chloe can get the development firm started. He lunged forward, attempting to physically snatch the encrypted tablet out of my hands. He wanted to assert dominance the way our parents had always allowed him to do when we were children. But we were not children anymore, and I was not the scapegoat sister who would quietly absorb his bullying. My reaction was pure muscle memory forged in combat zones where hesitation meant death. I did not strike him. I simply pivoted, dropping my center of gravity, and trapped his extended wrist in a joint lock. Using his own forward momentum, I twisted his arm sharply behind his back and drove him forward. Jamal let out a high-pitched gasp of pain as his chest slammed violently against one of the heavy wooden pillars supporting the porch roof. I pressed my forearm against the back of his neck, applying just enough pressure to immobilize him completely without causing permanent damage. He thrashed against the wood, sputtering and cursing, but he was entirely helpless. Listen to me very carefully, Jamal. I whispered, my voice dangerously calm, right next to his ear. You are a 35-year-old man, acting as a desperate errand boy for a white family that despises you. Chloe is not giving you an executive position. You are nothing but a convenient signature to them. I earned my Navy Cross pulling bleeding Marines out of crossfire while you were busy running your third business into bankruptcy. Do not ever attempt to put your hands on me again. I released the pressure and shoved him backward. Jamal stumbled down the porch steps, clutching his shoulder and panting heavily. His designer sunglasses had fallen into the dirt. He looked up at me, his face twisted into a mask of pure humiliation. You are crazy, he stammered, scrambling backward toward his ruined car. You are going to lose everything, Aaliyah. Everything. He threw himself into the driver's seat and slammed the car into reverse, spinning his tires aggressively as he fled down the driveway. I watched his car disappear beyond the iron gates, feeling a profound sense of disgust. I had given him fair warning. Whatever happened to him now was entirely his own fault. As the dust settled from his chaotic departure, a distinct mechanical sound caught my attention. It was a high-pitched electronic whine, buzzing persistently above the canopy of the ancient oak trees lining the eastern edge of the property. I stepped down from the porch and squinted against the morning sun. Hovering precisely 50 feet above the property line was a sleek commercial surveillance drone. The camera lens was pointed directly at the main house, actively recording our operations. Chloe was losing her mind. Her attempt to lock me out had failed. Her attempt to send Jamal as an enforcer had resulted in his total humiliation. Now she was resorting to illegal aerial surveillance to figure out what I was doing on the land she desperately needed. I did not panic. I smiled. I tapped the communication earpiece connecting me to the temporary command center inside the library. Tyrell, we have a hostile eye in the sky eastern perimeter, I announced smoothly. Deploy the localized frequency disruptor. Do not just block the signal. Hijack the telemetry feed. I want to know exactly who is holding the remote control. Copy that, boss, Tyrell replied instantly. Engaging signal override now. I watched the drone hovering in the sky. Suddenly, the mechanical whine shifted pitch. The drone jerked erratically to the left as our servers flooded its communication channels, overriding the original pilot's commands. We essentially trapped the device in a digital net, locking it in a stationary hover while Tyrell stripped the metadata from its active broadcast signal. Within 30 seconds, Tyrell's voice crackled back into my earpiece. His tone was laced with absolute shock. "Aaliyah, you are not going to believe this. I isolated the return to home protocol and traced the live broadcast internet protocol address." "Is it pointing back to Chloe's downtown condominium?" I asked, keeping my eyes locked on the captured drone. "No," Tyrell replied. "The surveillance feed is not routing to Chloe's property. The broadcast signal is directly tethered to a highly secure private network registered to a residential address in the wealthy northern suburbs." I cross-referenced the municipal property records. The drone is actively broadcasting to the personal home of Judge Harrison Sterling. A cold, predatory satisfaction washed over me. Chloe and the judge were not just communicating through anonymous offshore bank accounts anymore. They were actively sitting in the same room coordinating illegal aerial surveillance on a federal contractor. The corruption ran deeper and far more brazenly than I had initially calculated. They thought they were gathering evidence to use against me in court. They had just handed me the digital rope required to hang them both. The convoy of armored transport vehicles rolled onto my grandfather's 50-acre estate just as the sun crested the horizon. My team at Aegis Cyber Defense operated with the ruthless precision of a military unit conducting a tactical relocation. Within 3 hours, the sprawling mahogany library of the main manor was transformed into a state-of-the-art mobile command center. Thick cables snaked across antique Persian rugs, connecting military-grade servers to heavily encrypted satellite uplinks mounted on the slate roof. The deep hum of industrial cooling units filled the grand hallways, blending the old-world wealth of my family with cutting-edge cyber intelligence. My grandfather built this house with his own hands, a fortress of generational wealth that my parents never fully appreciated. Now it was literally serving as a digital fortress. Chloe thought her illegal commercial lockout would force me into submission. She expected me to spend my weekends sobbing in a cheap hotel room, begging my parents for financial forgiveness. Instead, she handed me the perfect operational justification to establish a secure perimeter on the exact land she was trying to steal. By executing an emergency disaster recovery protocol, I legally shielded our federal contracts from municipal interference. The trap was widening, and my family was completely oblivious to the jaws snapping shut around them. By Saturday morning, the perimeter was secured by my private detail. I was standing on the wraparound front porch, reviewing the latest decrypted wire transfers on my tablet, when a silver luxury sports car tore up the gravel driveway. The vehicle swerved aggressively off the designated path and parked directly on the manicured front lawn, tearing deep, muddy gashes into the grass my grandfather used to maintain with intense pride. The driver's side door swung open, and Jamal stepped out. My older brother looked enraged, wearing a tight designer polo shirt and expensive sunglasses that did absolutely nothing to hide his inherent cowardice. He slammed his car door and marched toward the porch. He did not even notice the high-definition surveillance cameras tracking his every movement or the 2 former Marine security contractors standing silently in the shadows of the wraparound porch. Jamal was too blinded by his own arrogance to process the reality of his surroundings. "Aaliyah, what is all this garbage?" Jamal shouted, gesturing wildly at the heavy transport trucks parked near the carriage house. "Are you running a cult out here now? I told you to sign the deed yesterday." Chloe is furious. Her father had to call in favors to get you locked out of your little office space, and now you are out here playing camping games with your computer repair friends. I kept my eyes on my tablet, swiping through a forensic financial report detailing his wife's offshore accounts. "I am conducting federal business on my private property." "Jamal," I replied without looking up, "you are currently trespassing on a secure facility. I strongly suggest you get back into your leased car and drive away before my security detail removes you from the premises." Jamal let out a loud, mocking laugh. He stomped up the wooden steps of the porch, closing the distance between us. He tried to tower over me, breathing heavily, smelling of expensive cologne and cheap desperation. Your security detail. You are so delusional, Aaliyah. You could not even make it through a desk job in the Navy without getting discharged, and now you are playing soldier on our grandfather's land. Stop embarrassing this family. Mom and Dad are sick of apologizing for you. Sign the paper right now so Chloe can get the development firm started. He lunged forward, attempting to physically snatch the encrypted tablet out of my hands. He wanted to assert dominance the way our parents had always allowed him to do when we were children. He expected me to cower, to shrink myself to protect his fragile ego, just like our mother always demanded. But we were not children anymore, and I was not the scapegoat sister who would quietly absorb his bullying. My reaction was pure muscle memory forged in combat zones where hesitation meant death. I did not strike him. I simply pivoted, dropping my center of gravity, and trapped his extended wrist in a joint lock. Using his own forward momentum, I twisted his arm sharply behind his back and drove him forward. Jamal let out a high-pitched gasp of pain as his chest slammed violently against one of the heavy wooden pillars supporting the porch roof. I pressed my forearm against the back of his neck, applying just enough pressure to immobilize him completely without causing permanent damage. He thrashed against the wood, sputtering and cursing, but he was entirely helpless against a woman he had spent his entire life underestimating. "Listen to me very carefully, Jamal," I whispered, my voice dangerously calm, right next to his ear. "You are a 35-year-old man acting as a desperate errand boy for a white family that despises you. Chloe is not giving you an executive position. You are nothing but a convenient signature to them. I earned my Navy Cross pulling bleeding Marines out of crossfire while you were busy running your third business into bankruptcy. Do not ever attempt to put your hands on me again." I released the pressure and shoved him backward. Jamal stumbled down the porch steps, clutching his shoulder and panting heavily. His designer sunglasses had fallen into the dirt, and he did not even try to pick them up. He looked up at me, his face twisted into a mask of pure humiliation. "You are crazy," he stammered, scrambling backward toward his ruined car. "You are going to lose everything, Aaliyah. Everything." He threw himself into the driver's seat and slammed the car into reverse, spinning his tires aggressively as he fled down the driveway. I watched his car disappear beyond the iron gates, feeling a profound sense of disgust. I had given him fair warning. Whatever happened to him now was entirely his own fault. The sheer audacity of the connection flashed across the screen of my tablet. A sitting civil court judge was not merely accepting campaign donations or hidden offshore wire transfers. Harrison Sterling was actively hosting the plaintiff at his private residence to conduct illegal aerial surveillance on a military veteran. Jamal stumbled backward down the porch steps, clutching his shoulder and gasping for air. He scrambled into his silver sports car without once looking up at the sky. He had no idea his own wife was watching his humiliating defeat in high definition from the comfort of a corrupt judge's living room. The tires of Jamal's car kicked up chunks of gravel and manicured grass as he sped blindly down the driveway. I did not waste another second watching my brother flee. I tapped the secure communication earpiece, linking me to my mobile command center inside the library. I ordered Tyrell to lock onto the hijacked telemetry feed and establish a two-way audio breach. My company did not just build defensive firewalls, we specialized in offensive digital infiltration. Within seconds, Tyrell routed the drone's live audio transmission directly into my earpiece. The crisp sound of ice clinking against crystal filled my ear, followed by the unmistakable sharp cadence of Chloe's voice. She sounded furious. She was shouting at the screen, complaining that Jamal was entirely useless. I stood perfectly still on the wraparound porch, listening as my sister-in-law verbally eviscerated the man my parents worshipped. Chloe called him a spineless failure who could not even handle a simple intimidation tactic against his little sister. Then a deeper voice echoed through the hijacked audio feed. It was Judge Sterling. His tone was laced with arrogance and deep impatience. He told Chloe he did not care about her marital disappointments. He reminded her that he had stuck his neck out by signing a fraudulent commercial eviction notice, before the courthouse even opened. Sterling demanded the final phase of their agreement be executed immediately. He wanted his money, and he wanted it clean. My blood ran cold, but my mind operated with absolute tactical precision. This was the golden child dynamic laid completely bare. My parents, Calvin and Valerie, had spent their entire lives conditioning Jamal to believe he was a king, while completely shielding him from the reality of sharks like Chloe. They told me my military service was an embarrassment to the family name and dismissed my cybersecurity firm as a temporary hobby. They practically pushed Jamal into Chloe's arms because her family possessed the kind of generational wealth and country club access my parents desperately craved. Now that very same woman was sitting in a corrupt judge's house, plotting to destroy the only real asset our family had left. Through the earpiece, I listened as Chloe assured Judge Sterling that the funds were actively being secured. She promised to initiate a priority wire transfer by the end of the day. Sterling warned her that he would issue an emergency summary judgment to seize my grandfather's estate the moment the money cleared his offshore accounts. He boasted that he could bypass standard legal protocols by declaring my property a municipal hazard, citing the heavy military-grade server equipment I had just moved onto the land. They were plotting to weaponize the very disaster recovery protocol I had initiated. But Chloe made a critical error during her frantic promise to the judge. She explicitly stated she was liquidating a joint investment portfolio to cover the bribe. She was not using her own wealthy family's capital. She was draining the life savings Jamal had managed to scrape together from his few remaining solvent accounts. Chloe was preparing to bankrupt my brother completely behind his back to pay off a judge for a fraudulent land seizure. I stepped off the porch and walked purposefully across the sprawling lawn, keeping my eyes locked on the hovering drone. I instructed Tyrell to isolate the drone's motor control interface. I did not just want to block their surveillance feed, I wanted the physical hardware. I wanted the encrypted memory card seated inside the chassis to hand directly to the Department of Justice. At my command, Tyrell flooded the drone's receiver with a targeted signal overload. Up in the sky, the four rotors suddenly seized. The mechanical whine died instantly. The expensive piece of surveillance equipment dropped like a stone from the sky, crashing hard into the thick branches of an ancient oak tree before tumbling down onto the damp soil of the estate. Through the audio feed, I heard Chloe shriek in frustration as her monitor undoubtedly went completely black. Judge Sterling shouted a profanity demanding to know if their location had been compromised. I did not give them the satisfaction of a response. I ordered Tyrell to sever the connection and wipe our digital fingerprints from the localized network node. I walked over to the shattered pieces of the drone and retrieved the central processing unit. The plastic casing was cracked, but the internal memory card was perfectly intact. I held the small piece of plastic in my palm, feeling the heavy weight of the evidence. I had the offshore bank routing numbers. I had the real-time audio recording of a sitting judge extorting a bribe. I had the exact location of the conspirators. My phone vibrated violently in my pocket. It was a rapid succession of panicked text messages from my mother, Valerie. She was demanding that I answer my phone immediately. She claimed Chloe was in tears because I had supposedly assaulted Jamal and threatened the family business. Chloe was already spinning a victim narrative to my parents, preparing to launch a massive public defamation campaign to cover her tracks. She was getting ready to unleash a viral attack to destroy my reputation before I could expose her crimes. She thought a public relations war would force me into hiding. She was about to find out that I never retreat from a battlefield. Tyrell's fingers flew across his mechanical keyboard, pulling the encrypted files from the shattered drone's memory card. The data transfer was nearly complete when a harsh red alert flashed across our secondary monitor. It was not a localized security breach. It was a mass digital deployment. Tyrell tapped the screen, bringing up a live feed from a major social media platform. There was Chloe. She was sitting in what looked like the impeccably decorated living room of her family's mansion. She wore no makeup, her blonde hair was intentionally messy, and her eyes were red-rimmed to simulate recent tears. The video had been uploaded barely an hour ago, and the view count was already skyrocketing into the hundreds of thousands. I crossed my arms and watched my sister-in-law deliver the performance of a lifetime. She looked directly into the camera, her voice trembling with manufactured trauma. She told her followers that she and her husband Jamal were simply trying to build a charitable youth center for underprivileged children. She claimed that I had violently assaulted Jamal when he went to the property to politely negotiate. The screen cut to a tightly cropped, heavily filtered photo of Jamal standing by his car, showing the dirt on his designer shirt and a faint red mark on his neck from my joint lock. But Chloe did not stop at playing the physical victim. She went straight for the jugular. She held up a blurry, zoomed-in screenshot of me in my dress blue uniform from the courthouse. "My sister-in-law is a dangerous, unstable woman," Chloe cried to the camera, wiping away a non-existent tear. "She uses a fake military record to intimidate people. We checked with our family lawyers. That Navy Cross she wears is a prop she bought online to steal sympathy and extort my husband. She is a fraud committing stolen valor, and right now she is illegally occupying my husband's family land with a radical armed militia. Please, we just want our land back so we can help the community." Tyrell paused the video. The comments section alongside the player was a waterfall of digital outrage. Thousands of people were calling for my immediate arrest. Strangers were posting the exact coordinates of my grandfather's estate, demanding that local authorities go in and forcefully remove the fake veteran. "I can geo-block the video and run a denial of service attack on the hosting servers to take it down," Tyrell stated, his hands hovering over his keyboard. "Give me 2 minutes and I will scrub this garbage off the internet." I shook my head, keeping my eyes fixed on Chloe's paused, tearful face. "Leave it up. Let it go viral. Let every single news outlet pick it up." Chloe just handed us a permanent, highly public record of criminal defamation and digital harassment. She is establishing a false public narrative to justify the emergency summary judgment she bought from Judge Sterling. We are going to let her dig this hole as deep as it can possibly go. Before Tyrell could respond, my secure phone rang. The caller identification displayed my father's name. I had ignored the panicked text messages from my mother earlier, but this required my direct attention. I accepted the call and put it on speakerphone, placing the device on the mahogany desk between Tyrell and me. "Aaliyah, what is wrong with you?" My father. Calvin's voice boomed through the speaker, vibrating with absolute fury. "Are you actively trying to destroy everything we have worked for in this city?" I could hear my mother Valerie sobbing loudly in the background. Her voice echoed through the line, thick with the kind of performative panic she usually reserved for church gossip. "Our friends from the country club are calling us Aaliyah. The pastoral board is leaving messages on our home phone. Chloe's video is everywhere. How could you assault your own brother?" I stood tall, leaning slightly toward the phone. "Jamal trespassed on a secure federal facility. He attempted to physically attack me to steal a piece of equipment. I restrained him without injury and sent him home. And Chloe's video is a calculated lie designed to distract you from the fact that her family is currently paying off a corrupt judge to steal our grandfather's land. Do not dare accuse Chloe of corruption to cover up your violent outbursts," Calvin shouted, completely rejecting my explanation. "Chloe comes from a respectable, powerful family. They are trying to build a legacy for Jamal, and you are acting like a street thug. You have disgraced this family with these stolen valor accusations. You made us look like frauds in front of our entire community." I felt a cold, sharp precision settle over my mind. They did not care about the truth. They did not care that I had actually served, bled, and fought to earn that medal. They only cared about the perceived humiliation within their elite African-American social circles. The respectability politics that governed their entire existence blinded them to the predators sitting right in their own living room. "I earned that Navy Cross pulling my team out of a burning transport vehicle," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly quiet register. "I have the citations, the shrapnel scars, and the federal records to prove it. Your daughter-in-law is committing a felony by publicly defaming a veteran to facilitate real estate fraud." "I do not care about your delusions of military grandeur," Valerie cried out, completely dismissing my service just as she always had. "You are going to log onto your social media right now and issue a public apology to Chloe and Jamal. You are going to sign the deed over to the development firm today. If you do not fix this public relations nightmare by tonight, you are no longer our daughter. We will cut you out of this family forever." The ultimatum hung in the air. For 33 years, I had navigated their impossible standards, their overt favoritism, and their constant demands that I shrink myself to make Jamal look taller. They were offering me a choice between my dignity and my place in a family that had never truly valued me. I looked at the paused image of Chloe's smirking, tear-stained face on the monitor. I looked at the encrypted data packets detailing the offshore bribes. I did not feel sorrow. I felt completely liberated. "You chose your side," I told my parents, my voice steady and completely void of regret. "Now watch what happens to it." I ended the call and blocked their numbers. There would be no more negotiations, no more warnings. As I set the phone down, the proximity alarms surrounding the estate began to blare. The viral video had done exactly what Chloe intended. It had emboldened her ground team. On the primary security monitor, I watched a caravan of 6 black pickup trucks tear through the front gates of the property. Chloe had sent a team of hired muscle to forcefully clear out the woman she thought was just a fake veteran playing dress-up. She was about to receive a masterclass in modern warfare. The dust from the breached iron gates plumed into the cold autumn air. 6 lifted black pickup trucks tore up the half-mile driveway of my grandfather's estate. They parked aggressively in a semicircle, cutting off the main exit route from the manor. More than a dozen men piled out of the cabs. They were dressed in cheap tactical gear, holding crowbars, heavy flashlights, and baseball bats. Chloe had clearly hired local muscle off the books. She assumed a viral video and a few broken windows would terrify me into signing away my family legacy. Tyrell stepped onto the porch beside me. He did not look panicked, but his jaw was tight. He asked if we should initiate the lockdown sequence and seal the manor doors. I shook my head. I kept my posture completely relaxed. You do not barricade yourself inside a fortress when you already control the battlefield. The lead thug, a hulking man with a shaved head and a jagged scar across his chin, marched toward the wooden steps of the wraparound porch. He slapped his crowbar into his open palm. He shouted that I had exactly 5 minutes to power down my servers, pack my bags, and vacate the premises. He recited Chloe's viral talking points verbatim, calling me a fraud and a squatter. He warned me that if I did not comply, they were going to smash every piece of computer equipment on the property and drag me off the land themselves. I did not raise my voice. I looked directly into his eyes and told him he was currently committing a federal crime by threatening a government contractor on a secure site. I advised him to turn around, get back into his truck, and drive away before he made a fatal error in judgment. The man laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that echoed across the lawn. He took another step forward, raising the crowbar. He told me that a fake metal was not going to save me from getting my teeth knocked out. He never took another step. A deep mechanical roar vibrated through the ground. It was not coming from their pickup trucks. Coming up the rear access road entirely off the grid and hidden by the dense tree line were 4 armored matte black sport utility vehicles. They moved with terrifying synchronized precision. The vehicles flanked the pickup trucks, instantly boxing them into the circular driveway. The heavy steel doors of the SUVs swung open in unison. Out stepped a dozen men in unmarked black tactical uniforms. They did not carry baseball bats. They carried suppressed submachine guns strapped to their chests and sidearms holstered at their thighs. They moved without making a single sound, fanning out to secure the perimeter with the flawless execution of elite military operators. Leading the squad was Dion Carter. 5 years ago, in a blistering hot valley overseas, Dion was a corporal bleeding out from a shrapnel wound to his femoral artery. He and 2 other Marines were pinned down under heavy enemy machine gun fire. The extraction chopper could not land. The commanding officer ordered a retreat. I disobeyed that order. I ran 200 yards through a highly active kill zone, dragging Dion and his men back to the armored transport vehicle one by one. I took a bullet to my shoulder and shrapnel to my thigh, but I kept every single one of them breathing. They were the men who submitted the rigorous paperwork detailing my actions that day. They were the reason I was awarded the Navy Cross. When I launched Aegis Cyber Defense and secured my first Department of Defense contract, I needed a private security detail capable of protecting classified federal intelligence. I did not hire a random corporate security firm. I hired the exact Marines whose lives I saved. They knew my character, and I knew their lethal efficiency. Dion walked past the frozen thugs and stopped at the base of the porch stairs. He looked at the lead thug with the crowbar. Dion did not shout. He did not issue a verbal threat. He simply stared at the man with the cold, dead eyes of a combat veteran who had survived hell. He casually rested his hand on his tactical vest, right above his sidearm. The lead thug swallowed hard. The crowbar suddenly looked completely ridiculous in his hand. He looked at Dion, then looked around at the dozen heavily armed operators silently surrounding his crew. The terrifying reality of his situation crashed down on him. He had brought a blunt instrument to a fight with highly trained military specialists protecting a federal site. "Drop it," Dion commanded, his voice barely above a whisper. The crowbar clattered onto the gravel driveway. Panic spread through the hired muscle like a wildfire. Without waiting for another order, the men scrambled frantically backward. They shoved each other out of the way to get back into their pickup trucks. Doors slammed and engines gunned as they threw their vehicles into reverse. They were so desperate to escape the perimeter that two of the trucks sideswiped each other, tearing off their side mirrors in a frantic bid to flee the estate. We watched them speed away, leaving behind nothing but tire marks and the bitter stench of their cowardice. Dion turned his attention to me, offering a crisp, sharp salute. "Perimeter is secure, boss," he stated, his tone entirely professional. "Let us know if anyone else needs a reminder about trespassing." I returned the nod, stepping off the porch to inspect the damage to the lawn. Chloe had exhausted her physical intimidation tactics. She had tried to bully me with family pressure, corrupt legal filings, and hired muscle. Every single attempt had backfired spectacularly. Now she was completely exposed, running entirely on the fumes of her viral social media lie. The heavy wooden doors of the manor burst open. Tyrell sprinted out onto the porch, clutching a digital tablet to his chest. His eyes were wide, and he was breathing heavily. He bounded down the steps, completely ignoring the heavily armed security team securing the grounds. "Aaliyah, you need to look at this right now," Tyrell said, shoving the tablet into my hands. I looked down at the glowing screen. While Chloe was busy deploying thugs and recording fake crying videos for the internet, my cybersecurity team had been actively monitoring her financial footprint. A massive red alert was flashing across the financial tracking software. It was an expedited offshore wire transfer initiated just 3 minutes ago. "She is panicking," Tyrell explained, tapping the highlighted routing numbers. "The judge is demanding his money today to finalize the emergency summary judgment. But Chloe is not using her family's corporate development accounts. She bypassed her father's firm completely." I stared at the origin account numbers. The cold calculation of what I was looking at settled heavily into my chest. Chloe had just authorized the liquidation of 3 separate investment portfolios. They were not her accounts. They were the joint life savings and retirement funds belonging entirely to my brother. Jamal had absolutely no idea. He was busy defending his wife to our parents, completely oblivious to the fact that Chloe was currently draining every single penny he owned to pay off a corrupt judge. She was bankrupting him to buy her victory. I handed the tablet back to Tyrell, my mind locking onto the next tactical move. It was time to show my brother the true cost of his blind loyalty. The glowing screen of the tablet reflected in the crisp morning light. I traced the routing numbers with my index finger, watching a digital massacre unfold in real time. Chloe was not just transferring liquid cash to cover her tracks. She was systematically dismantling my brother's entire financial existence. Tyrell stood beside me, breaking down the data packets as they encrypted and bounced across international servers. She was liquidating his retirement accounts. She was draining the joint savings they had built over 5 years of marriage. She was even pulling the maximum available equity out of their overpriced suburban home. Every single cent my brother had to his name was being funneled through a cryptocurrency tumbler before routing directly into a Cayman Islands holding company. We already knew that specific holding company was entirely controlled by Judge Harrison Sterling. The timeline was accelerating because of the viral video. Chloe had successfully whipped the internet into a frenzy, but she knew digital outrage had a very short lifespan. She needed the land seized immediately. The judge was demanding his bribe up front before he bypassed legal protocols to finalize the emergency summary judgment. He wanted his money washed and cleared before he slammed his gavel and handed my grandfather's estate over to her family's development firm. I stared at the progress bar ticking past 70%. A bitter realization settled into my chest. Jamal had always bragged at Sunday dinners about how he managed the wealth in his household. My father Calvin used to pat him on the back, proclaiming that a real man provides an unquestionable safety net for his wife. My mother Valerie would constantly praise Chloe for being such a traditional submissive partner. Chloe had played her role perfectly. She stroked Jamal's fragile ego, letting him believe he was the master of his domain, while she quietly secured power of attorney over every single asset he possessed. My parents had cheered him on for marrying into a wealthy white family, believing her proximity to power validated our own social standing. They never realized she was just setting up the ultimate heist. Tyrell looked at me, his hands hovering over the encrypted terminal he had wheeled out to the porch. He asked me if we should freeze the transfer. My firm had the offensive capability to intercept the handshake protocol and bounce the funds right back into Jamal's accounts. I had the power to save my brother from total financial ruin with a single command. I watched the progress bar hit 85%. If I stopped the transfer, Jamal would never believe his wife tried to destroy him. He was too deeply conditioned by our parents to ever admit he had been played for a fool. He would accuse me of hacking his accounts to frame the woman he loved. He would run crying to Calvin and Valerie, who would immediately spin a narrative about my vindictive jealousy. Worse, if I intercepted the money, Judge Sterling would not receive his bribe. The final irrefutable piece of our federal extortion case would be missing. I needed that corrupt judge to accept those funds to seal his own federal indictment. I looked at Tyrell and shook my head. I told him to let the transaction complete. I ordered him to mirror the data packets and send the encrypted receipts directly to our secure Department of Justice liaison server. We needed the federal crime to be fully executed on the digital ledger. I stood in silence on the wraparound porch, watching the progress bar hit 100%. The screen flashed a bright green confirmation notification. Millions of dollars vanished into the digital ether. Jamal was officially and entirely bankrupt. He did not have enough money left to buy a cup of coffee. I handed the tablet back to Tyrell and pulled my own phone from my uniform pocket. My brother had spent his entire life being protected from the consequences of his actions. My parents had built a towering fortress of delusion around him, always demanding that I lay down my own achievements to cushion his failures. It was time to tear that fortress to the ground. I opened my messages and drafted a text to Jamal. I did not use sympathy, and I did not offer comfort. I told him to meet me at an independent coffee shop downtown in exactly 1 hour. I instructed him to come completely alone and to make sure his wife did not know where he was going. I knew his pride would make him want to ignore me, so I added one final sentence guaranteeing he would show up. I told him I was finally ready to discuss surrendering the deed to the estate. The response came through less than 10 seconds later. Jamal agreed to the meeting. He even added a smug remark about how he knew I would eventually come to my senses and respect the family hierarchy. I locked my phone and signaled to my security team to maintain the perimeter. I walked to my armored SUV, feeling a cold, calculating focus take over my mind. My brother thought he was walking into a victory lap to claim his prize. He had no idea he was walking into a financial autopsy. The artisan coffee shop on the edge of the financial district was exactly the kind of neutral ground I needed. It was quiet, heavily monitored by street cameras, and entirely removed from the toxic echo chamber of my parents' house. I arrived 15 minutes early, securing a corner booth with a clear view of the entrance. I wore a tailored charcoal blazer over a crisp white blouse, projecting the exact corporate authority my family constantly claimed I lacked. On the polished wooden table in front of me sat a single waterproof digital tablet. It was locked onto the financial autopsy of my brother's entire life. Jamal walked through the glass doors exactly on time. His posture radiated an unearned supreme arrogance. He wore a custom-tailored navy suit and a luxury watch that he currently did not know he could no longer afford. He scanned the room, spotted me in the corner, and marched over with a triumphant smirk plastered across his face. He truly believed he had broken me. He thought the viral video, the hired thugs, and the fake eviction notice had finally forced me to surrender our grandfather's land. He slid into the booth opposite me and signaled a barista ordering a black espresso with a dismissive flick of his wrist. He leaned back against the leather seat, crossing his arms over his chest. "I knew you would finally come to your senses, Aaliyah," Jamal said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Mom and Dad are still furious about the stunt you pulled on the porch, but Chloe is willing to let it slide. Hand over the deed. Once the community center is built, we might even let you attend the ribbon-cutting ceremony." I did not blink. I did not raise my voice. I looked at the man I had spent my entire childhood protecting from his own incompetence. I reached out and slowly slid the digital tablet across the wooden table until it rested directly in front of him. "There is no deed, Jamal," I stated flatly. "But there is a complete ledger of your current financial ruin. I am giving you one last chance to walk away from that woman before the federal government steps in and buries you alongside her." Jamal frowned, looking down at the glowing screen. His eyes darted across the columns of data, the offshore routing numbers, and the zero balances on accounts holding his name. The smirk slowly slid off his face, replaced by a deep, furrowed confusion. "What is this garbage?" he demanded, tapping the screen with a manicured finger. "Did you type up a fake bank statement to scare me?" "That is a real-time mirror of your joint financial portfolio," I explained, my voice devoid of any sympathy. "While you were busy driving out to my property to play a tough guy for your wife, she was sitting in Judge Harrison Sterling's private residence. She bypassed your authorization and liquidated your entire 401k. She drained your joint savings account. She pulled the maximum allowable equity out of your suburban home. Every single cent was pushed through a cryptocurrency tumbler and wired directly into an offshore shell company owned by the judge. She bankrupted you to pay a bribe, Jamal." He stared at the screen for a long, agonizing moment. The mathematical reality was staring him right in the face. The dates, the exact dollar amounts, the account numbers, they were all irrefutably accurate. But acknowledging the truth meant admitting that he was not a powerful patriarch. It meant admitting he was a gullible pawn who had been completely manipulated by the woman our parents worshipped. His fragile ego simply could not process the absolute devastation of his reality. So he did exactly what Calvin and Valerie had trained him to do his entire life. He attacked me to protect his own delusion. "You are lying," Jamal hissed, his voice trembling with a mixture of panic and rising rage. "You hacked into a template and fabricated federal financial documents because you are sick with jealousy. You have always been jealous of Chloe." "Jealous of a woman committing felony wire fraud?" I countered smoothly, leaning forward. "Jamal, check your banking app right now. Call your broker. The money is gone. She stole your life savings to buy my land because her wealthy family refused to bankroll her illegal casino project." "She does not need my money," Jamal shouted, slamming his hand onto the table, causing his freshly delivered espresso to spill over the rim of the cup. "Chloe comes from a real pedigree, Aaliyah. She has generational wealth. She has class and status and connections you could never possibly comprehend. You are just a bitter, lonely woman who cannot stand the fact that I married into the kind of elite society that wants absolutely nothing to do with you." I sat perfectly still, absorbing the viciousness of his delusion. He was clinging to the respectability politics that had poisoned our family tree. He believed Chloe's whiteness and her family's country club memberships made her inherently superior and trustworthy, while viewing his own black sister as a bitter, deceitful enemy. "I offered you a lifeline, Jamal," I said, my tone dropping to a glacial chill. "I showed you the door out of a burning building. If you stay, you will burn with her." Jamal grabbed his ceramic coffee cup, his knuckles turning white. "You are a complete fraud." He spat, his face contorted with absolute hatred. "You are going to lose your business, your land, and your freedom. We are going to destroy you." He hurled his hot espresso directly across the table. The dark liquid splashed violently against the waterproof screen of the tablet and splattered across the crisp lapel of my charcoal blazer. The few patrons in the coffee shop gasped, turning their heads to watch the commotion. I did not flinch. I had taken shrapnel to the thigh in a combat zone. A splash of hot coffee from a desperate coward meant absolutely nothing to me. Jamal stood up abruptly, knocking his chair backward. He pointed a shaking finger at my face. "You are dead to me, Aaliyah. Do not ever contact me or my wife again." He spun on his heel and stormed out of the coffee shop, the glass doors slamming loudly behind him. He marched down the sidewalk, completely unaware that he did not even have enough money left in his checking account to pay for the parking meter, holding his leased sports car. I calmly picked up a napkin and wiped the espresso off the screen of my tablet. I dabbed the stain on my blazer, feeling a profound sense of closure settle over my mind. I had fulfilled my final moral obligation to my bloodline. I had given my brother the truth, and he had thrown it back in my face. I pulled my encrypted phone from my pocket and dialed my secure contact at the Department of Justice. Jamal had made his choice. Now I was going to make mine. The artisan coffee shop on the edge of the financial district was exactly the kind of neutral ground I needed. It was quiet, heavily monitored by street cameras, and entirely removed from the toxic echo chamber of my parents' house. I arrived 15 minutes early, securing a corner booth with a clear view of the entrance. I wore a tailored charcoal blazer over a crisp white blouse, projecting the exact corporate authority my family constantly claimed I lacked. On the polished wooden table in front of me sat a single waterproof digital tablet. It was locked onto the financial autopsy of my brother's entire life. Jamal walked through the glass doors exactly on time. His posture radiated an unearned supreme arrogance. He wore a custom-tailored navy suit and a luxury watch that he currently did not know he could no longer afford. He scanned the room, spotted me in the corner, and marched over with a triumphant smirk plastered across his face. He truly believed he had broken me. He thought the viral video, the hired thugs, and the fake eviction notice had finally forced me to surrender our grandfather's land. He slid into the booth opposite me and signaled a barista, ordering a black espresso with a dismissive flick of his wrist. He leaned back against the leather seat, crossing his arms over his chest. "I knew you would finally come to your senses," Aaliyah Jamal said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Mom and Dad are still furious about the stunt you pulled on the porch, but Chloe is willing to let it slide. Hand over the deed. Once the community center is built, we might even let you attend the ribbon-cutting ceremony." I did not blink. I did not raise my voice. I looked at the man I had spent my entire childhood protecting from his own incompetence. I reached out and slowly slid the digital tablet across the wooden table until it rested directly in front of him. "There is no deed, Jamal," I stated flatly. "But there is a complete ledger of your current financial ruin. I am giving you one last chance to walk away from that woman before the federal government steps in and buries you alongside her." Jamal frowned, looking down at the glowing screen. His eyes darted across the columns of data, the offshore routing numbers, and the zero balances on accounts holding his name. The smirk slowly slid off his face, replaced by a deep, furrowed confusion. "What is this garbage?" he demanded, tapping the screen with a manicured finger. "Did you type up a fake bank statement to scare me? That is a real-time mirror of your joint financial portfolio." I explained, my voice devoid of any sympathy. "While you were busy driving out to my property to play a tough guy for your wife, she was sitting in Judge Harrison Sterling's private residence. She bypassed your authorization and liquidated your entire 401k. She drained your joint savings account. She pulled the maximum allowable equity out of your suburban home. Every single cent was pushed through a cryptocurrency tumbler and wired directly into an offshore shell company owned by the judge. She bankrupted you to pay a bribe, Jamal." He stared at the screen for a long, agonizing moment. The mathematical reality was staring him right in the face. The dates, the exact dollar amounts, the account numbers, they were all irrefutably accurate. But acknowledging the truth meant admitting that he was not a powerful patriarch. It meant admitting he was a gullible pawn who had been completely manipulated by the woman our parents worshipped. His fragile ego simply could not process the absolute devastation of his reality. So he did exactly what Calvin and Valerie had trained him to do his entire life. He attacked me to protect his own delusion. You are lying, Jamal hissed, his voice trembling with a mixture of panic and rising rage. You hacked into a template and fabricated federal financial documents because you are sick with jealousy. You have always been jealous of Chloe. Jealous of a woman committing felony wire fraud? I countered smoothly, leaning forward. Jamal, check your banking app right now. Call your broker. The money is gone. She stole your life savings to buy my land because her wealthy family refused to bankroll her illegal casino project. She does not need my money, Jamal shouted, slamming his hand onto the table, causing his freshly delivered espresso to spill over the rim of the cup. Chloe comes from a real pedigree, Aaliyah. She has generational wealth. She has class and status and connections you could never possibly comprehend. You are just a bitter, lonely woman who cannot stand the fact that I married into the kind of elite society that wants absolutely nothing to do with you. I sat perfectly still, absorbing the viciousness of his delusion. He was clinging to the respectability politics that had poisoned our family tree. He believed Chloe's whiteness and her family's country club memberships made her inherently superior and trustworthy, while viewing his own black sister as a bitter, deceitful enemy. I offered you a lifeline, Jamal. I said, my tone dropping to a glacial chill. I showed you the door out of a burning building. If you stay, you will burn with her. Jamal grabbed his ceramic coffee cup, his knuckles turning white. You are a complete fraud, he spat, his face contorted with absolute hatred. You are going to lose your business, your land, and your freedom. We are going to destroy you. He hurled his hot espresso directly across the table. The dark liquid splashed violently against the waterproof screen of the tablet and splattered across the crisp lapel of my charcoal blazer. The few patrons in the coffee shop gasped, turning their heads to watch the commotion. I did not flinch. I had taken shrapnel to the thigh in a combat zone. A splash of hot coffee from a desperate coward meant absolutely nothing to me. Jamal stood up abruptly, knocking his chair backward. He pointed a shaking finger at my face. You are dead to me, Aaliyah. Do not ever contact me or my wife again. He spun on his heel and stormed out of the coffee shop, the glass doors slamming loudly behind him. He marched down the sidewalk, completely unaware that he did not even have enough money left in his checking account to pay for the parking meter holding his leased sports car. I calmly picked up a napkin and wiped the espresso off the screen of my tablet. I dabbed the stain on my blazer, feeling a profound sense of closure settle over my mind. I had fulfilled my final moral obligation to my bloodline. I had given my brother the truth, and he had thrown it back in my face. I stepped out of the coffee shop and into the biting wind of the financial district. The hot espresso soaking through my crisp white blouse was a physical reminder of my brother's absolute cowardice. I had handed Jamal the key to his own cage. I had shown him the exact financial records proving his wife was bankrupting him to pay a bribe. Instead of turning his anger toward the white woman who was actively destroying him, he chose to attack his black sister who was trying to save him. He was desperate to protect his proximity to Chloe's generational wealth, even as she drained his bank accounts to zero. My conscience was permanently clear. I pulled my encrypted phone from my pocket and pressed the biometric shortcut for my federal contact. Special Agent Mitchell answered on the second ring. We had been coordinating in the shadows for over 8 months. My firm's cybersecurity audit of the Municipal Zoning Board was always a joint operation with his division at the Department of Justice. Mitchell had spent 5 years trying to build a racketeering case against Chloe's family real estate empire. Her father and uncles had spent decades redlining historic neighborhoods, bribing city planners, and forcefully gentrifying communities while hiding their money behind impenetrable corporate veils. They always insulated themselves using disposable pawns. Jamal was supposed to be their latest fall guy. I have the final puzzle piece, I told Mitchell, keeping my voice perfectly level as I walked toward my armored vehicle. Chloe panicked. She liquidated my brother's entire financial portfolio and wired the funds directly to Judge Harrison Sterling's offshore shell company. I have the routing numbers, the digital receipts, and real-time audio of the judge demanding the extortion money. Mitchell instructed me to meet him at the secure federal drop site immediately. I drove to the subterranean parking garage beneath the federal courthouse. The concrete walls blocked all cellular signals, creating an absolute dead zone. Mitchell was waiting beside a black government vehicle. He was a seasoned federal prosecutor who rarely showed emotion, but his eyes sharpened as I handed him the heavy encrypted hard drive. This drive contains the hijacked drone telemetry mapping directly to the judge's private residence, I explained. It contains the financial autopsy of Jamal's ruined accounts and the direct wire transfers linking Chloe to Sterling. They thought they were bullying a helpless local business owner into surrendering prime real estate. They did not realize they were transmitting federal crimes across our active surveillance net. Mitchell plugged the drive into his secure terminal, resting on the hood of his vehicle. He watched the data populate across his screen. The offshore accounts unraveled in real time, exposing the bribery ring that had corrupted the city's civil courts for over a decade. Chloe's family had finally made a fatal tactical error. By using a sitting judge to illegally lock out my firm, they had inadvertently triggered a federal jurisdiction clause. By draining Jamal's accounts to pay the bribe, Chloe provided the exact financial link the DOJ needed to dismantle her entire bloodline. The federal government had the hammer. I had just handed them the nail. I left the federal building and drove back to my grandfather's estate. The mobile command center inside the sprawling mahogany library was humming with quiet, lethal efficiency. Tyrell and my security team were actively monitoring the municipal court dockets, anticipating Chloe's next desperate maneuver. I walked past the glowing server racks and stepped into the private study, closing the heavy wooden doors behind me. The sudden silence of the room provided a rare moment of stillness. I walked over to the large oak desk and looked at the framed document resting next to my grandfather's old brass lamp. It was my Navy Cross citation. I picked it up and traced the raised lettering against the glass. The black ink detailed the exact coordinates in the desert where my medical transport vehicle was struck by an improvised explosive device. Whenever my parents, Calvin and Valerie, tried to make me feel small, I read this citation. They constantly dismissed my military service as a rebellious phase. They told their country club friends I joined the Navy because I lacked the intellectual discipline for corporate America. They worshipped Chloe because she wielded her family's wealth like a weapon while treating me like an uneducated brute. But they had no idea what it actually meant to survive. The citation described the thick, choking black smoke and the deafening roar of enemy machine gun fire ripping through the chassis of our vehicle. It detailed exactly how I ignored a direct order to retreat. It documented how I ran 200 yards back into a highly active kill zone with shrapnel embedded in my own thigh. I dragged 3 bleeding Marines out of that burning wreckage one by one, using my own body as a shield against incoming fire. I smelled copper and burning fuel. I felt the agonizing weight of carrying grown men through a valley of death. I kept every single one of them breathing until the extraction chopper finally touched down. I set the framed citation back onto the desk. A profound sense of absolute clarity washed over me. I had faced down heavily armed insurgents in a desert wasteland. I had stared death in the face and refused to blink. Dealing with a spoiled, entitled sister-in-law and a crooked municipal judge was absolutely nothing. It was just white-collar paperwork. Chloe thought her social status and her family's dirty money made her invincible. She thought she could steal my grandfather's legacy to build a luxury casino while destroying my brother's life in the process. She thought a fake viral video and a corrupt civil judge would force me to surrender. She was about to find out what happens when you bring a country club mentality to a federal war zone. I adjusted the cuffs of my blazer and prepared to drop the final hammer. The silence of the mahogany study was shattered by the sharp crackle of my tactical earpiece. Dion's voice cut through the secure channel, his tone tight with professional urgency. "Boss, we have local law enforcement at the main gate, 2 county sheriff cruisers with their light bars flashing. They are escorting a civilian process server. Do we deny entry?" I set my framed Navy Cross citation back onto the oak desk. They were escalating faster than I anticipated. "Let them through the gate, Dayon, but hold them at the bottom of the porch steps. I will greet them personally." I smoothed the lapels of my blazer and walked out of the study, my footsteps echoing down the grand hallway of my grandfather's estate. When I pushed open the heavy double front doors, The flashing red and blue lights of the sheriff cruisers painted the sprawling front lawn in harsh, frantic strokes. 3 county deputies stood with their hands resting intimidatingly on their duty belts, trying to project absolute authority. Standing behind them was a sweating, overly aggressive process server clutching a thick manila envelope. This was a classic intimidation tactic. My parents, Calvin and Valerie, used to employ a similar strategy whenever I stepped out of line as a teenager. They would bring in our church pastor or a wealthy country club uncle to corner me in the living room, using their collective authority to force me to apologize to Jamal for whatever minor inconvenience I had allegedly caused him. They wanted me to feel small, isolated, and outnumbered. They never understood that pressure only sharpens my focus. I walked to the edge of the porch, looking down at the uninvited guests. The process server practically shoved his way past the deputies, marching up the wooden steps with a smug expression. He thrust the manila envelope directly at my chest, forcing me to take it. "Aaliyah Washington, you have been officially served," the man barked, puffing out his chest, as if he had just accomplished a massive tactical victory. "You are ordered to appear in municipal civil court tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock sharp." I did not react to his aggressive posturing. I calmly opened the envelope and pulled out the legal documents. The heavy black text at the top of the page confirmed my suspicions. It was an emergency summary judgment signed and expedited by Judge Harrison Sterling. I read through the fabricated legal jargon with cold, clinical detachment. Sterling had completely bypassed the standard 30-day discovery protocol. He was utilizing a deeply obscure municipal loophole, claiming that the presence of my high-voltage server equipment constituted an immediate catastrophic environmental hazard to the surrounding suburban district. He was officially ordering the immediate forfeiture of my grandfather's 50 acres, demanding I vacate the premises by tomorrow morning so the land could be placed under emergency municipal receivership. He was stripping me of my property rights without a trial, without a jury, and without a single shred of actual environmental evidence. I looked at the signature at the bottom of the page. Sterling's handwriting was rushed. The ink pressed so hard into the paper it nearly tore the page. He was terrified. He had already accepted the millions of dollars Chloe wired into his offshore shell company earlier this afternoon. Now he had to deliver the stolen land before the digital trail caught up to him. He was burning his judicial oath to the ground just to cover his tracks. "Is there a problem, ma'am?" one of the sheriff deputies asked, stepping forward with his hand still resting on his belt. The judge made it very clear that if you resist this summons, we are authorized to arrest you for contempt and physically remove you from the property tonight. I looked the deputy dead in the eye. "I am a federal contractor operating a secure data facility. The only people authorized to remove me from this land carry badges that outrank yours by several pay grades. I will be in Judge Sterling's courtroom tomorrow morning at 9. You can leave my property now." The deputy bristled, wanting to argue, but he caught sight of Dion and my private security team flanking the porch. The tactical rifles strapped across their chests served as a very clear reminder of jurisdiction. The deputy swallowed hard, motioning for the process server to fall back. They scrambled into their cruisers and sped down the driveway, desperate to escape the perimeter. The moment their taillights vanished beyond the iron gates, my encrypted phone began to vibrate. The caller identification displayed a restricted number, but I knew exactly who it was. I swiped the screen to accept the call. "I hope you are currently packing your bags and boxes," Aaliyah Chloe's voice rang through the speaker, dripping with absolute triumph. "Or would you prefer I send Jamal over with some trash bags for your cheap business suits?" I did not raise my voice. I leaned against the heavy wooden pillar of the porch, staring out over the dark expanse of my grandfather's land. "You are awfully confident for a woman who just committed felony wire fraud, Chloe." She laughed, a sharp, grating sound that echoed through the receiver. "You are still clinging to that ridiculous hacker fantasy. Nobody cares about your fake computer files, Aaliyah. Your own parents just called to thank me for finally putting you in your place. They are sitting in my living room right now, celebrating the fact that Jamal is finally getting the legacy he deserves. Tomorrow morning, Judge Sterling is going to finalize the forfeiture. You are going to walk out of that courtroom with absolutely nothing, and I am going to bulldoze that ugly old house by Friday." She was so drunk on her perceived white privilege and generational power that she could not even comprehend the trap she was currently standing in. She genuinely believed her proximity to a corrupt local judge made her invincible. She thought she had outsmarted a woman who had spent her entire adult life analyzing enemy tactics. "I will see you in court tomorrow, Chloe," I said smoothly. "Make sure you wear something appropriate for the occasion." I ended the call before she could fire back another insult. I turned and walked back inside the manor, the heavy oak doors sealing shut behind me. Tyrell was waiting in the library, his eyes locked onto the glowing monitors mapping the final data sequence. The DOJ liaison just confirmed receipt of the offshore routing numbers, Tyrell stated, his voice steady. They have cross-referenced the judge's shell companies with Chloe's liquidation transfers. The financial chain is locked and federally verified. I nodded, feeling the adrenaline flood my veins. The months of meticulous planning, the constant barrage of insults from my parents, the aggressive bullying from my brother, and the blatant corruption of a local judge were all culminating in one single unavoidable collision. They thought they had cornered me in a rigged legal system. They had no idea I had just lured them into a federal execution chamber. I pulled out my phone and opened a secure encrypted text thread. I typed a single message to Special Agent Mitchell at the Department of Justice. "The trap is snapping shut. See you in court." The heavy oak double doors of the municipal courthouse swung open. I walked down the center aisle with the measured, deliberate stride of a woman who fully controlled the battlefield. Today I did not wear my dress blue uniform. I wore a razor-sharp charcoal business suit meticulously tailored. I was not here to play the role of the dutiful veteran they had mocked. I was here as the chief executive officer of a Tier 1 federal intelligence firm, and I was here to execute a corporate slaughter. The gallery was standing room only. Chloe had packed the wooden benches with her entire bloodline. Her father and uncles, the ruthless architects of their family real estate syndicate, sat in the front row wearing smug expressions and expensive tailored suits. They looked at me with the absolute disdain of men accustomed to buying whatever they wanted and crushing anyone who stood in their way. Sitting directly beside them, desperately trying to project an air of belonging, were my parents, Calvin and Valerie. My mother wore her most expensive church hat, leaning over to pat the hand of Chloe's mother in a sickening display of subservience. My parents were so intoxicated by their proximity to white generational wealth that they were actively cheering for the destruction of their own daughter. They glared at me as I walked past them, their eyes flashing with profound embarrassment. They wanted me to submit. They wanted me to shrink, so Jamal could finally pretend to be a king. At the plaintiff table, Jamal sat with his chest puffed out, wearing a new designer suit Chloe had undoubtedly purchased with the very funds she had just drained from his secret bank accounts. He looked at me with a triumphant sneer, completely oblivious to the fact that his financial existence had been reduced to zero just hours prior. He truly believed he was about to seize our grandfather's 50-acre estate and step into the elite echelon of commercial real estate developers. He was a hollow shell of a man running on the fumes of his wife's delusions. Chloe sat beside him, dabbing the corners of her eyes with a pristine white tissue. She was already performing for the gallery, playing the fragile, exhausted victim who had been terrorized by her aggressive sister-in-law. At the front of the room, Judge Harrison Sterling sat elevated on his bench. He looked terrible. His ruddy complexion was slick with a sheen of nervous sweat, and his hands twitched as he shuffled the legal files in front of him. He had bypassed every standard 30-day discovery protocol to force this emergency hearing. He was terrified. He had already accepted the millions of dollars Chloe wired into his offshore Cayman Islands account yesterday afternoon. Now he had to deliver the stolen land before the digital trail caught up to him. He was a man trapped in a burning building of his own making. Judge Sterling slammed his wooden gavel violently against the sound block. The sharp crack echoed through the cavernous room, silencing the murmurs of the gallery. "Miss Washington, you have exhausted the absolute limits of this court's patience," Sterling barked, pointing his gavel directly at my face. "You have ignored a lawful commercial eviction. You have moved highly hazardous, unauthorized electronic equipment onto a disputed residential property. You have created an immediate environmental crisis in a municipal zone." I am bypassing standard mediation protocols to address this catastrophic liability. I stood perfectly still at the defense table, resting my fingertips lightly on the polished wood. Your Honor, there is no environmental crisis. I am operating a federally compliant secure data facility on private land deeded exclusively to me. Chloe instantly shot up from her chair, knocking it backward. The pristine white tissue was crumpled in her shaking hands. Her voice trembled, hitting the exact pitch required to elicit maximum sympathy from the packed gallery. Your Honor, please! She cried out, her voice echoing with manufactured desperation. You have to stop her. She is sick. Aaliyah is suffering from severe delusions of military grandeur. She thinks she is running some secret government spy agency. She hired armed thugs to terrorize my husband when he simply went to the property to check on her well-being. She is hoarding our family land out of pure spite because she is jealous of Jamal's success. My mother, Valerie, stood up in the front row of the gallery, clutching her designer handbag against her chest. It is true, Your Honor, Valerie shouted, completely violating courtroom protocol. Aaliyah has always been unstable. She could not handle the military and she cannot handle reality. We just want to get her psychiatric help. Please grant the deed to Jamal so we can build the community center and bring peace back to our family. My own mother was utilizing her respectability politics to publicly crucify me. She was actively weaponizing the stereotype of the angry, unstable black woman to appease Chloe's wealthy white family. Calvin nodded vigorously beside her, placing a comforting hand on Jamal's shoulder. They were handing me over to the wolves with absolute pride. Judge Sterling did not reprimand my mother for her outburst. He used it to fuel his corrupt agenda. He leaned over the bench, his eyes burning with frantic, malicious intent. The court recognizes the profound distress of the plaintiff and her extended family, Sterling announced, his voice booming through the microphone. Miss Washington, your actions demonstrate a clear and present danger to the community and a blatant disregard for municipal authority. You are illegally occupying land required for immediate civic development. I did not flinch. I let him speak. I let him cement his abuse of power onto the official court record. I am ordering the immediate forfeiture of the 50-acre estate currently held in your name, Sterling declared, raising his gavel high into the air. The property will be placed under the emergency receivership of Sterling and Company Developments to begin immediate remediation of your hazardous equipment. You will sign the transfer deeds right now, Miss Washington. If you refuse, I will hold you in criminal contempt of court. I will have the bailiff place you in handcuffs, and you will sit in a county jail cell until you comply. A collective sigh of relief washed over Chloe's family in the gallery. Jamal crossed his arms and offered me a sickeningly arrogant smile. Chloe wiped her fake tears and looked at me with absolute venomous triumph. They thought they had backed me into an inescapable corner. They thought the threat of incarceration would shatter my discipline and force me to beg for mercy. I looked at the sweating, corrupt judge. I looked at the entitled, manipulative sister-in-law who had just bankrupted my brother. I looked at the parents who had sold my dignity for an invitation to a country club. I stood tall, smoothing the crisp lines of my tailored blazer. I reached down to the defense table and picked up a thick, heavy manila envelope that had been resting completely unnoticed beside my encrypted tablet. I did not cower. I did not beg for mercy. I simply stood up from the defense table. I was not wearing my dress blue uniform today. I wore a razor-sharp charcoal business suit cut to absolute perfection. I was not the disgraced veteran they wanted to parade in front of the gallery. I was the chief executive officer of a federal intelligence firm, and I was about to execute a corporate slaughter. The smug smiles on my parents' faces faltered slightly as I stepped out from behind the table. Jamal leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms, thinking I was walking forward to surrender the deed to my grandfather's estate. Chloe dabbed her fake tears with a tissue, waiting for her ultimate victory. I walked straight past them and stopped directly in front of the judge's bench. Your Honor, I will not be handing over the property. I stated, my voice ringing with crystal-clear authority. But I will be handing over this. I pulled a thick, heavy, sealed federal dossier from my briefcase and dropped it directly onto his elevated bench. The heavy thud of the paper echoed through the silent courtroom. Judge Sterling stared at the manila envelope. He recognized the official seal of the Department of Justice stamped across the clasp. The blood instantly drained from his ruddy face. Before he could process the physical evidence, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my encrypted mobile device. My cybersecurity team had already bypassed the municipal courthouse audio-visual system. I tapped a single command on my screen. Every single television monitor in the courtroom flickered to life simultaneously. The large projector screens mounted on the walls dropped down unrolling with a loud mechanical hum. Instantly, the entire gallery gasped. Projected in high definition across the courtroom was the complete financial autopsy of their criminal syndicate. I did not just show numbers. I showed the exact offshore bank accounts. I showed the illegal wire transfers, highlighted in bright neon red. The screens displayed the intricate web of hidden shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands, directly linking Sterling and Company developments to the judge presiding over this very room. But the most devastating piece of evidence was displayed on the monitor positioned directly in front of the plaintiff table. Jamal squinted at the screen. I watched the exact moment his brain processed the data. The monitor displayed a joint savings account ending in 4421. It was his account. The balance read 0. Below it was his 401k retirement portfolio. It also read 0. Beside those figures was the home equity line of credit for his suburban mansion maxed out to the absolute limit. Jamal stared at the screen as the graphic traced a massive wire transfer initiated by his wife Chloe, draining his entire life savings to pay off Judge Harrison Sterling just yesterday afternoon. "What is this?" Jamal whispered, his voice trembling as he turned to his wife. "Chloe, what did you do to my accounts?" Chloe dropped her tissue. The fragile victim persona vanished instantly, replaced by sheer, wide-eyed panic. She lunged forward, trying to shield the monitor with her hands, but the data was projected on every screen in the room. Her wealthy father and uncles, sitting in the front row of the gallery, leaped to their feet, shouting at the judge to turn off the monitors. My mother, Valerie, let out a loud, confused shriek. Calvin grabbed her arm, pointing at the screens, realizing that the son they had worshipped as a financial genius was currently broadcasting his absolute bankruptcy to their entire social circle. The respectability they cared about more than their own daughter was being shredded in real time. "Turn those screens off right now!" Judge Sterling screamed, his voice cracking with pure terror. He slammed his wooden gavel against the sound block repeatedly, but his hands were shaking so violently he dropped the mallet onto the floor. "You cannot authorize an emergency forfeiture for a property you were bribed to steal, Your Honor," I said, projecting my voice over the rising panic in the room. "You accepted a wire transfer of $4 million to bypass municipal zoning laws. My federal audit traced every single penny from my brother's liquidated savings directly into your private trust. You did not corner a helpless veteran. You walked straight into a Department of Justice surveillance operation." The courtroom erupted into absolute chaos. Chloe grabbed Jamal by the lapels of his suit, shaking him and screaming that I had fabricated the documents. Jamal shoved her off him, staring at his empty bank accounts on the screen, his entire fragile ego shattering into a million pieces. The golden child was finally realizing he was nothing but a pawn. My parents were shouting over the gallery noise, demanding someone explain what was happening to their son's money. Judge Sterling leaned over his bench, his face contorted into a mask of desperate, cornered rage. His judicial career, his freedom, and his reputation were evaporating right in front of his eyes. "Bailiff, arrest that woman," Sterling roared, pointing a trembling finger directly at me. "I am holding her in criminal contempt. Arrest her for cyber-terrorism. She hacked a municipal network. Put her in handcuffs right now." The armed bailiff hesitated, looking at the federal seals displayed on the monitors and then looking at the frantic, sweating judge. But his training kicked in, and he unclipped his handcuffs, stepping cautiously toward me. "Miss Washington, turn around and place your hands behind your back," the bailiff ordered, his voice lacking any real conviction. I did not move a single muscle. I stood perfectly still, keeping my eyes locked on the disgraced judge. I did not need to fight the bailiff. I knew exactly what was waiting on the other side of the courtroom doors. Before the bailiff could take another step, The heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with such tremendous force that they slammed against the marble walls. The sound cracked through the chaotic room like a gunshot, instantly silencing the screaming gallery. Special Agent Mitchell strode down the center aisle. He was not alone. A dozen heavily armed federal marshals marched into the courtroom, wearing tactical vests emblazoned with federal insignia. Their heavy boots struck the floor in unison, a terrifying drumbeat of absolute federal authority. They bypassed the gallery, entirely ignoring the panicked gasps of Chloe's wealthy family and my horrified parents. Mitchell stopped right behind the plaintiff table. He looked up at the pale, trembling judge and then down at the manipulative woman who had orchestrated the entire scheme. "Harrison Sterling, you are under arrest for extortion, judicial corruption, and federal wire fraud," Mitchell announced, his deep voice carrying to every corner of the room. "Chloe Washington, you are under arrest for conspiracy, money laundering, and felony fraud." Chloe let out a blood-curdling scream. She tried to bolt toward the gallery to reach her father, but two federal marshals grabbed her arms immediately, forcing them behind her back. The metallic click of the heavy steel handcuffs snapping shut around her wrists was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. The metallic click of the heavy steel handcuffs snapping shut around Chloe's wrists echoed through the silent courtroom. She thrashed against the grip of the two federal marshals. Her pristine white designer suit wrinkled as they pulled her arms forcefully behind her back. The fragile, tearful victim persona she had weaponized just moments ago completely evaporated. She screamed wildly, her face turning a mottled red. She demanded that her father do something to stop this. But her father and uncles, the architects of the corrupt real estate syndicate, were already rushing toward the courtroom exits. They shoved past the stunned spectators, entirely abandoning her to save themselves from the federal fallout. They knew the Department of Justice was coming for their corporate empire next, and Chloe was nothing but collateral damage. Realizing her own bloodline had left her to burn, Chloe turned her frantic gaze toward the plaintiff table. She shrieked Jamal's name, ordering him to use his money to post her bail. She demanded he call his lawyers and fix the situation right now, but my brother did not move a single muscle. Jamal sat perfectly still in his expensive chair, staring blankly at the massive projector screens that still displayed the zero balances of his completely drained life savings. The reality of his absolute ruin had short-circuited his mind. Special Agent Mitchell stepped around the defense table and walked directly up to my brother. He did not offer any sympathy. Mitchell informed Jamal that because his personal financial portfolios were utilized to facilitate the illegal wire transfers to a corrupt judge, his name was directly implicated in a federal racketeering investigation. Mitchell stated that under federal asset forfeiture laws, every single bank account, line of credit, and property deed bearing Jamal's name was officially frozen pending a full criminal inquiry. Jamal was not just broke. He was a target of the United States government. Jamal slowly raised his head, his eyes wide and vacant. He looked at Chloe as the marshals began dragging her down the center aisle. He did not try to stand up. He did not offer a single word of defense for the woman he had claimed was his ultimate prize. The illusion of his power, the fake corporate throne our parents had built for him, crumbled into dust right there on the courtroom floor. He was a 35-year-old man, left with absolutely nothing, stripped of his borrowed wealth and his unearned pride. A sudden chaotic commotion erupted from the front row of the gallery. My mother Valerie and my father Calvin shoved their way past the remaining spectators. They completely ignored Chloe as she was hauled past them in handcuffs. The wealthy white daughter-in-law they had practically worshipped, the woman they had prioritized over their own black daughter, was suddenly invisible to them. Their toxic loyalty had a singular focus. They rushed past the federal agents and threw themselves over the wooden divider to reach Jamal. Valerie wrapped her arms around Jamal's shoulders, sobbing hysterically and pulling his face against her chest as if he were a toddler who had scraped his knee. She glared at Special Agent Mitchell and screamed that there had been a terrible mistake. She claimed her son was a brilliant entrepreneur who was the victim of a sophisticated corporate setup by his wife. Calvin puffed out his chest, stepping aggressively toward the federal prosecutor. My father demanded to speak to whoever was in charge, arrogantly threatening to call his friends at the country club and the local city council to have the agents reprimanded. Mitchell looked at my father with the cold, hardened patience of a man who dismantles organized crime rings for a living. He advised Calvin to step back immediately before he was charged with obstructing a federal investigation. He told my father that his local country club connections meant absolutely nothing to the Department of Justice. Calvin's shoulders slumped, his chest deflating as the crushing weight of real, inescapable authority finally broke his arrogance. The respectability politics my parents had used as a shield, their entire lives shattered against the unforgiving reality of federal law. I stood at the defense table and watched the destruction of the Washington family delusion. They had spent decades forcing me to shrink, demanding I hide my achievements to protect Jamal's fragile ego. They had called me a disgrace and dismissed my military service because I refused to participate in their shallow social climbing. They had literally watched a corrupt judge try to steal my grandfather's land, and they had smiled because they thought it would buy Jamal a seat at a table that was never meant for him. Now the golden child was a penniless suspect in a federal fraud case. Their pristine family reputation was permanently destroyed in front of the very community they had tried so desperately to impress. The people from their church, the business associates they had invited to watch my downfall, they were all whispering and pointing at the glorious spectacle of my brother's failure. Chloe's screams faded as the heavy courtroom doors swung shut behind her, leaving a ringing silence in her wake. Jamal buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with the realization that he could no longer hide behind anyone else's money or influence. Valerie continued to stroke his hair, weeping loudly about the unfairness of the world. Calvin stood paralyzed, staring at the frozen projector screens, as if hoping the numbers would magically change. They were drowning in a sea of their own making. I had pulled bleeding Marines out of active war zones, risking my own life, because they were my brothers in arms. I had shed my own blood for people who understood the meaning of honor and sacrifice. But looking at the three people huddled around the plaintiff table, I felt nothing but a profound, chilling emptiness. They were not my brothers in arms. They were scavengers who had tried to feed on my success. The bailiff who had nearly placed me in handcuffs just minutes earlier now stood awkwardly by the judge's bench. He lowered his head, refusing to meet my gaze. Judge Sterling was being escorted through the private chamber's doors, his judicial robes looking absurd on a man destined for a federal penitentiary. The entire corrupt power structure of the city had collapsed in less than 5 minutes. I reached down and picked up my encrypted mobile phone from the defense table. I slipped it smoothly into the interior pocket of my tailored blazer. I did not need to run a disaster recovery protocol anymore. The disaster had been fully contained and neutralized. The 50 acres of land my grandfather had purchased with a lifetime of hard work remained exactly where it belonged, safely in the hands of the only Washington who had the discipline to defend it. I adjusted my collar, taking one final look at the absolute wreckage of Jamal's life. He had traded his loyalty, his integrity, and his family legacy for a lie. He had allowed his wife to weaponize the legal system against his own blood. He deserved every single ounce of the misery currently crashing down upon him. The heavy oak doors of the courtroom swung shut behind me, cutting off the chaotic symphony of my brother's total ruin. I walked down the long marble corridor of the courthouse, my tailored heels clicking with a steady, rhythmic finality. I did not look back. I had executed my mission with absolute precision, and my conscience was entirely clear. Aaliyah, wait. The frantic echoing of rapid footsteps rushed up behind me. I stopped and turned slowly. My mother Valerie and my father Calvin were practically sprinting down the hallway. Their faces were flushed, and their pristine Sunday church clothes looked suddenly disheveled. They had left Jamal slumped over the plaintiff table to chase after the daughter they had spent 33 years trying to erase. Valerie reached me first. She threw her arms open, her eyes wide with a manic, desperate kind of affection I had never once seen, directed at me. She lunged forward, trying to pull me into a tight embrace. "We knew you were smart," baby Valerie pleaded, her voice trembling with manufactured maternal pride. "You saw what Chloe was doing to him. You set this up to catch her. You protected the family. I took a sharp, deliberate step backward, leaving her arms grasping at empty air. I looked at her with ice-cold indifference. I protected myself. I stated my voice perfectly level. You enabled them. My mother's face crumpled, her hands dropping awkwardly to her sides. Calvin immediately stepped forward, puffing out his chest in a desperate final attempt to assert his patriarchal authority. He could not accept that the power dynamic had permanently shifted. "Now you listen to me, Aaliyah," Calvin ordered, pointing a shaking finger at my face. "You are going to walk right back into that courtroom and tell that federal agent to unfreeze your brother's bank accounts. You clearly have influence with these government people." Jamal had nothing to do with Chloe's illegal wire transfers. He is your blood. You need to fix this right now before his reputation is completely destroyed. I stared at the man who had demanded I surrender my grandfather's 50-acre estate just to buy his son a fake corporate title. They had watched Chloe defame my military service. They had stood by while a corrupt judge threatened to throw me in a county jail cell. Even now, with the undeniable proof of Chloe's massive federal crimes glaring them in the face, they still viewed me solely as a tool to cushion Jamal's failures. Jamal's reputation is already destroyed. Calvin, I replied, refusing to call him Dad ever again. He destroyed it the moment he chose a woman who viewed our family as disposable pawns. And you helped him do it. You sold your own dignity for the illusion of elite social status. You wanted the country club invitations and the wealthy white in-laws so badly that you willingly handed over the deed to your own son's destruction. That is a lie. Valerie sobbed, clutching her designer handbag against her chest, as if it could somehow protect her from the truth. We just wanted what was best for our children. We wanted you both to succeed. You wanted a golden child? I corrected her sharply. You poured every ounce of your love, your finances, and your pride into a man who ran 3 businesses into bankruptcy. When I earned a full academic scholarship, you told me I was being too aggressive. When I joined the Navy, you told your friends I was just going through a rebellious phase. When I built a highly successful federal intelligence firm, you dismissed it as a little computer repair shop because acknowledging my success meant admitting Jamal was a failure. Calvin's jaw tightened. He tried to muster another authoritarian command, but the words died in his throat under my unwavering gaze. You let Chloe mock my military service, I continued, stepping closer to them. You watched her call my Navy Cross a fake prop. You stood in that gallery ready to applaud, while an extortionist judge stripped away the land my grandfather bled for. You did not come out to this hallway to congratulate me, Valerie. You came out here because you just realized I am a multi-millionaire federal contractor, and you need my money to bail out your broke son. Neither of them spoke. The devastating accuracy of my words stripped away the last remaining shreds of their respectability politics. They stood under the harsh fluorescent lights of the courthouse, looking exactly like what they were. 2 aging enablers who had sacrificed their strongest child to feed their weakest. Do not ever call my secure phone again, I said, my voice dropping to a final chilling register. Do not show up at my estate. You chose your legacy. Now you get to live with it. I turned my back on them and walked toward the exit. I pushed through the heavy glass doors and stepped out into the crisp autumn sunlight. Dion was waiting beside my armored black SUV, holding the rear passenger door open. He offered a crisp, professional nod as I slid into the leather seat. The heavy armored door slammed shut, severing my ties to the Washington family forever. The epilogue of their destruction was swift and absolutely brutal. The Department of Justice did not offer plea deals. They brought the full crushing weight of the federal government down on the entire corrupt syndicate. Judge Harrison Sterling was stripped of his gavel, disbarred, and publicly disgraced. The federal prosecutors traced every single offshore shell company and illegal kickback routing straight through his residential internet protocol address. He was convicted of extortion, wire fraud, and judicial corruption. The man who had arrogantly demanded I remove my military medal was sentenced to 20 years in a federal penitentiary. Chloe did not fare any better. She tried to turn state's evidence against her own family, offering to testify against her father and uncles in exchange for immunity. But her father was a ruthless corporate predator who operated entirely without loyalty. The moment the DOJ issued the subpoenas, her family's legal team threw her completely under the bus. They produced documents claiming Chloe acted as a rogue agent, isolating the development firm from her specific wire fraud charges. Her wealthy family abandoned her to save their own empire, but the IRS seized their corporate assets anyway. Chloe was convicted of money laundering and conspiracy. She traded her pristine white designer suits for a standard-issue federal prison uniform. Jamal avoided criminal charges because he was genuinely too oblivious to understand the crimes his wife was committing. But his ignorance did not save him from absolute financial ruin. The federal asset forfeiture laws permanently wiped out his savings. His luxury vehicles were repossessed. The bank foreclosed on his overpriced suburban mansion. The 35-year-old golden child was left with absolutely nothing. With no job, no wife, and no money, he was forced to pack his meager remaining belongings into garbage bags and move back into his childhood bedroom at Calvin and Valerie's house. My parents became social pariahs. The viral video Chloe had posted completely backfired. The local news stations picked up the story of the federal raid, broadcasting the details of the bribery ring to the entire city. The elite country club members they had tried so desperately to impress immediately revoked their memberships. The pastoral board at their church asked them to step down from their leadership positions. They were left sitting in their quiet house, with their bankrupt son trapped in a prison of their own making. Meanwhile, I stood on the sprawling wraparound porch of my grandfather's estate, breathing in the fresh, unburdened air. The 50 acres of land remained untouched by corporate greed, safely secured under my name. The estate was buzzing with quiet, lethal efficiency. My private security team patrolled the perimeter while top-tier analysts walked across the grounds. We had officially transitioned the main manor into the permanent headquarters for Aegis Cyber Defense. The mobile servers had been integrated into a state-of-the-art subterranean command center beneath the carriage house. We were actively securing 2 new massive Department of Defense contracts. I walked back inside the manor and stepped into my new corner office. The afternoon sunlight poured through the large bay windows, illuminating the rich mahogany walls. I walked over to a beautiful custom-built glass display case resting on the center of my desk. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my Navy Cross. The heavy bronze metal caught the sunlight, gleaming with the profound weight of true earned sacrifice. I did not buy it online. I did not wear it as a prop. I earned it by walking through the fire and refusing to leave my people behind. I carefully pinned the metal onto the velvet backing inside the display case and closed the glass door. I looked out the window over the sprawling green acres my grandfather had built. I had protected his legacy. I had defended my honor. I had exposed the predators and cut away the dead weight. I was secure. I was wealthy, and for the first time in my entire life, I was forever free of the family that never deserved me. The most profound lesson from Aaliyah's journey is that true power does not require loud validation or public spectacles. When toxic individuals, even blood relatives, attempt to diminish your worth or steal your peace, your greatest weapon is silent, strategic preparation. Respectability politics and blind family loyalty will only anchor you to other people's failures. You are not obligated to shrink yourself to comfort someone else's fragile ego. True freedom begins the moment you stop seeking approval from those committed to misunderstanding you. Set unbreakable boundaries, trust your own capabilities, and never hesitate to walk away from tables where respect is no longer being served. If this story gave you the courage to stand your ground and protect your peace, hit the like button, subscribe for more empowering narratives, and share your own experiences with setting boundaries in the comments below.